As competitive human beings, we do almost everything to get an edge on our opponents, sometimes even cheating to gain that advantage. However, if everyone is cheating, like in the case of performance-enhancing drugs, is it even called cheating anymore? Performance-enhancing drugs are currently illegal for use in sporting events, but they are used anyway. After reading many articles about this subject, I've developed an extensive amount of knowledge on this topic. This information is important for mostly everyone because almost everyone watches some sort of sport and has a say on what should be allowed and what shouldn't. These drugs should be allowed because of their current popularity, the fairness behind it, and how easy it is to cheat and reap massive rewards over time. This change could impact almost all sports and could change how many people watch these sports, as athletes would become stronger, faster, and overall better. According to an article in a December 2004 edition of the British Journal of Sports Medicine entitled "Why We Should Allow Performance-Enhancing Drugs in Sport," they say that Olympic athletes believe that most successful athletes are using banned substances. In fact, the use of performance-enhancing drugs was in the third Olympiad by a man taking strychnine in the middle of a marathon, and then he proceeded to win. The idea of using these types of drugs has existed for decades, but at first were not incredibly effective. The first drugs were more along the lines of whatever they found that seemed to work. But with the advent of technology, these drugs became more and more effective. These drugs have become so effective that, as stated by F. Hart-Jens and H. Coopers, anabolic steroids, even in doses much lower than those used by athletes, could improve muscular strength by 5 to 20%. Now this graph right here shows different maxes, so like different maxes for different lifts, squat, bench, military press, and seated press, and it shows when they're taking steroids through a 12-week period. As you can see, it increases a lot over this relatively short amount of time. This is a huge increase when these elite athletes are experiencing the law of diminishing returns, when they've almost reached their maximum point and the ability to increase in skill has diminished exponentially. This increase could amount to a year of strength training or even a whole lifetime worth, even though there isn't any completely solid objective evidence, as the athletes are doing something illegal and would rather not disclose that. The anecdotal picture reveals that attempts to eliminate these drugs from sports have failed, and as a result, it would be much simpler to simply allow them, rather than fail at fighting them. But what about how unfair this makes the sport? It does make the sport unfair to all the athletes trying to follow the rules and not being able to get their bodies into this high of a body stature where everyone else is. But the problem with this stems from when everyone is super, no one will be. If everyone is on these drugs, then everyone is faster and stronger, but faster and stronger than what? Not from each other. They're all considered super at this point, but only super compared to what they are now. Eventually, this super will become the standard, and we'll be back at square one. This isn't necessarily bad, as most sports follow a routine along these lines, i.e., the standard for skill now, compared to 50 years ago, is much higher, but drugs would accelerate the process. However, looking at these problems from a viewpoint in the present, it would still be considered unfair to those not taking these drugs, inciting a sort of lose-lose situation. In a 1982 article in the American Journal of Medicine entitled "Effect of Beta Blockade and Beta Stimulation on Stage Fright," it states that classical musicians commonly use beta blockers to control their stage fright. These drugs lower heart rate and blood pressure, reducing the physical effects of stress, and it has been shown that the quality of a musical performance is improved if the musician takes these drugs. Even though elite classical music is arguably as competitive as elite sports, with similar rewards, there is no problems with musicians using these drugs. That isn't to say elite music doesn't have rules. There are many rules, but this is not one of them. So why is this perceived as normal, whereas in sports it is exactly the opposite? So who is it really unfair against? Those who are trying to play by the rules or those who do not? The answer to this question is in one part very obvious, but in another not so much. In the present, it is unfair against those who want to follow the rules, but in the future, when it is standard, it is unfair to those who have a genetically superior trait that they got by chance, such as height in basketball. In order for their trait to be worthwhile, they'll need to take these drugs as well. This part is not necessarily a problem, as the vast majority of these athletes will do just that. So therefore, the problem becomes less of a problem than trying to ban these drugs. These elite athletes are then condemned to cheat for a variety of reasons. The rewards that come with taking these drugs could range from a small amount to a lifetime of multi-million-dollar success. This gives athletes a major incentive to take these drugs, and when weighed against potential repercussions of 6 months to a year from competing, the answer is crystal clear for the chance at a lifetime of success. The International Amateur Athletic Federation estimates that only 10 to 15% of athletes are even tested in each major competition. Now, this graph right here shows sports doping, so taking steroids in sports after a certain span of time, and it shows Olympic sports and non-Olympic sports. So the Olympics, as shown, they crack down a lot more on steroid use, but on non-Olympic sports they didn't really, and so it's only been increasing more and more as time goes on. So the chances for them to be found out are incredibly small, making the benefits well worth it. This places athletes in a form of prisoner's dilemma, where the fact that they can end up with a huge payoff and the fact that the repercussions are relatively small means that, in a logical standpoint, they have no choice but to take them. In conclusion, banning performance drugs could damage sports for a variety of reasons. Banning these drugs only makes sports unfair and more corrupt, and therefore should be simply allowed, as this would be the best and easiest solution to the problem. We have failed in trying to stop these drugs, which only leaves one main option, and that is simply to allow it. This will end up making athletes better, which means sporting events will be more fun to watch. What is the point of banning anything if you're not going to do anything to enforce it? Drugs should be allowed as it is the easier solution, but also because it may be the fairer and safer solution. Thank you.